The champagne glass nearly slipped from Victoria Chen's hand the moment the first notes floated across the grand ballroom, a melody so achingly familiar it stopped her heart mid-beat. A song no one should know except the boy who had written it for her 30 years ago. Under a summer sky neither of them could afford to stay beneath. She was 52 now, CEO of one of the nation's most successful consulting firms, draped in designer elegance and the armor of a woman who had conquered every room she entered. Yet, in that instant, she became 17 again, trembling in a hand-me-down dress, believing love could rewrite the story her poverty had scripted for her. Across the marble lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where her company's annual gala was being held, a young black woman sat at the piano, her fingers moving with such tender precision across the keys that Victoria felt something crack inside the fortress she'd spent 3 decades building. This wasn't a professional pianist. This was someone playing a memory, playing a prayer, playing a song that shouldn't exist anymore. Victoria set down her glass and moved through the crowd of executives and investors, as if in a trance, her Louboutins clicking against marble like a countdown, her breath shallow. Because the melody was exactly as she remembered, the gentle opening that sounded like hope, the middle passage that swelled with impossible dreams, the ending that always felt like a promise someone couldn't keep. The young woman at the piano was perhaps 29 or 30. Wearing a simple black dress that had been carefully mended at the shoulder, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that couldn't quite contain its fullness, and her eyes were closed as she played, as if the music was the only thing holding her together. When the song ended, the lobby erupted in polite applause, but Victoria couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare as the pianist opened her eyes, dark, soulful eyes that held the kind of exhaustion Victoria recognized from her own, mirrored decades ago, and began gathering her sheet music with hands that trembled slightly. "Excuse me," Victoria heard herself say, her voice hoarse, as she approached the piano. And the young woman looked up, startled, probably expecting a complaint or a dismissive request. Certainly not expecting to see a woman who looked like she'd seen a ghost. "That song. Where did you learn that song?" The pianist's expression shifted from wariness to surprise, then to something softer, sadder. "It's just something I play," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd learned to make herself small in a world that demanded she justify her existence. "My father wrote it. He's gone now." Victoria felt the floor tilt beneath her expensive shoes. "Your father," she repeated, her throat tight. "What was his name?" The young woman hesitated, glancing around as if checking whether she was allowed to have this conversation, whether this elegant woman would disappear the moment she revealed too much. Marcus Washington. He was a music teacher before he got sick. He passed away 4 years ago. The name hit Victoria like a wave, drowning her in memories. Marcus Washington. The boy with second-hand sneakers and a smile that made her believe in futures neither of their families could imagine. The boy who'd worked 3 jobs while going to community college, who'd composed music on scraps of paper because he couldn't afford a proper notebook, who'd written this particular song for her the night before she'd made the hardest decision of her life. He called it Victoria's Promise, the young woman continued, her eyes glistening now. "He never told me who Victoria was, but he played it every year on the same day, August 14th. He'd sit at our old keyboard, the one with the broken keys, and he'd play this song and cry, and I never understood why until after he died and I found his journals." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. August 14th, the day she'd left, the day she'd walked away from Marcus, and the love they'd shared because her mother was dying and needed treatment they couldn't afford, because a scholarship to a university 3,000 miles away was the only path out of poverty, because Marcus had insisted she go, even though it meant leaving him behind, because she'd believed, foolishly, that love could survive distance and time and the brutal mathematics of survival. I'm Victoria, she whispered, and the young woman's eyes widened. I'm the Victoria from the song. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the noise of the gala fading to a distant hum, the elegant lobby shrinking until there was nothing but this piano, this melody, this impossible bridge across 3 decades. The young woman stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile magic had brought them to this moment. He wrote about you, she said, her voice breaking. Pages and pages about the girl who was brilliant and brave and determined to change the world. He said, you were the smartest person he'd ever met, that you deserved every opportunity the universe could offer, that letting you go was the hardest and rightest thing he'd ever done. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now, and she didn't care that her makeup was running, didn't care that several gala attendees were staring, didn't care about anything except understanding what had happened to the boy she'd loved with her whole young heart. I wrote to him, she said desperately. Every week for 2 years, I wrote letters. I sent them to his last address, but they all came back unopened. I thought he'd moved on, found someone else, forgotten about me. The pianist shook her head, her own tears falling freely. He never got them. His father, my grandfather, he was a hard man, angry at the world. When you left, he told my father you'd called, said you'd met someone else, someone with money and prospects, said you wanted him to stop holding you back. My father was devastated, but he believed it because it confirmed everything he'd feared about not being good enough for you. He didn't know his father had intercepted every letter you sent, had hidden them in a box in the attic, out of some twisted idea that he was protecting his son from more heartbreak. Victoria felt rage and grief collide in her chest. I never called. I never met anyone else, not for years. I threw myself into my studies, my career, because work was the only thing that didn't remind me of what I'd lost. I became successful because success was easier than feeling, easier than remembering that I'd left half my heart with a boy who played piano and believed in me when no one else did. The young woman reached into her worn purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, handled so many times it was soft as fabric. After Grandpa died, we found them. 37 letters, every one of them unopened. I read them after my father passed, and I finally understood why he played that song every August 14th. Why he never really moved on, even though he married my mother and tried to build a good life. He loved her, I know he did, but she knew, and I think it broke something in both of them. She left when I was 7, and it was just me and Dad, until cancer took him. Victoria accepted the envelope with shaking hands, recognizing her own youthful handwriting on the front. The hope and longing she'd poured into words she'd thought had been rejected. What's your name? She asked softly. Maya? Maya? Washington. Maya, Victoria repeated, tasting the name, seeing Marcus in the curve of the young woman's smile, in the elegance of her fingers, in the quiet dignity she wore, despite circumstances that had clearly not been kind. Why are you playing here? You're talented enough to be performing anywhere. Maya's laugh was bitter and exhausted. Talent doesn't pay the bills when you're a single mother with a 4-year-old son and medical debt from your father's cancer treatment. I teach piano to kids in the neighborhood during the day, play here at night, and take whatever freelance gigs I can find. My son stays with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She paused, then smiled through her tears. Funny, same last name as you. She's kind, doesn't charge much, but I know I'm asking too much of her. No, I'm one emergency away from everything falling apart. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a door she'd kept locked for 30 years swinging open. Marcus wanted me to change the world, she said slowly. He believed I could make a difference, could use whatever success I achieved to help people. I built a company, made more money than I ever dreamed possible. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was doing it. I forgot the girl who needed help, who got lucky with a scholarship, who only made it because a boy who had nothing gave her everything. She met Maya's eyes, seeing past and present collide. I can't get back the years I lost with your father. I can't undo the lies his father told, or the letters that never reached him, but I can honor what Marcus and I had, what he wanted for me, what he clearly wanted for you. Over the next hour, as the gala continued without her, Victoria sat with Maya in a quiet corner of the lobby and learned about Marcus's life, how he'd become a music teacher in an underfunded school, how he'd bought instruments with his own money for kids who couldn't afford them, how he'd stayed in the same struggling neighborhood where he'd grown up because he believed in giving back, how he'd been a wonderful father despite the sadness he carried, how he'd made Maya promise to never give up on her music, no matter how hard life got, how his last words had been about the song, about making sure someone remembered Victoria's promise. Victoria told Maya about her own journey, the loneliness of success, the relationships that never quite worked because she was comparing everyone to a memory, the empire she'd built while feeling empty, the philanthropy work she'd started but never felt was enough, the hole in her life she'd tried to fill with achievements and recognition that meant nothing when she went home to an empty penthouse. As they talked, something remarkable happened. Grief transformed into connection, regret softened into purpose, and two women who'd been strangers an hour ago recognized in each other the same resilience, the same determination, the same legacy of a love that refused to be forgotten. I want to set up a scholarship fund in your father's name, Victoria said finally, for talented students who can't afford to pursue music, and I want you to help me run it not as charity, but as a real position with a real salary, benefits everything you and your son need. Maya stared at her in disbelief. I can't. That's too much. You don't even know me. I know you're Marcus's daughter, Victoria said firmly. I know you're a single mother working 2 jobs and still finding time to make music. I know you play your father's song like it's a sacred trust. I know you're exactly the kind of person who understands what this scholarship could mean, because you've lived the struggle it's meant to address. She paused, her voice softening. And I know that for 30 years, I've been successful and lonely, powerful and empty, because I never dealt with losing the person who believed in me most. Maybe I can't change the past, but I can honor it. I can make sure Marcus's legacy and yours becomes something beautiful. Maya covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking, and when she looked up, her expression was transformed by something Victoria hadn't seen there before. Hope. He would have loved this, she whispered. He would have been so proud of you, of what you've accomplished, of who you've become. I wish I could tell him I'm sorry, Victoria said, her own voice breaking. Sorry for believing he'd abandoned me. Sorry for not trying harder to find him. Sorry for all the years we lost. He forgave you before there was anything to forgive, Maya said gently. His journals made that clear. He understood why you left. He was proud of you even from a distance, even through the pain. He followed your career, read every article about your company, told me about this amazing woman who'd escaped the same poverty he never could. He didn't know it was you until a year before he died, saw your photo in a business magazine and recognized your eyes. He cried for 3 days, then wrote you a letter he never sent because he thought you'd moved on, thought you had a family, thought disturbing your peace would be selfish. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a sealed envelope. Victoria's name written in a masculine hand that was shaky but still beautiful. He asked me to find you if I ever could, to give you this, to let you know that loving you was the best thing in his life, even though losing you was the hardest. Victoria accepted the letter with trembling hands, but didn't open it. Not yet, not here, not until she could give Marcus's words the private, sacred attention they deserved. Will you play the song again? She asked instead. Will you play Victoria's Promise? Maya nodded and returned to the piano, and this time when her fingers touched the keys, Victoria stood beside her, close enough to see the sheet music, to read the notes Marcus had written by hand decades ago, to see the dedication at the top in his careful script, for Victoria, who taught me that love means letting go so the other person can fly. As the melody filled the lobby again, Victoria closed her eyes and let herself remember the boy with dreams bigger than his circumstances, the summer nights spent planning impossible futures, the way Marcus had held her the night before she left and told her she was going to change the world, the promise she'd made to come back for him that circumstances had prevented her from keeping. When the song ended, Victoria opened her eyes to find several gala attendees watching with tears on their faces, moved by a beauty they couldn't name, by a story they didn't know but somehow felt. Maya looked up at her, and in that moment, Victoria saw a path forward she'd never imagined. Not romance, not replacement, but something deeper: connection across generations. A chosen family born from loss and love, a way to transform old grief into new purpose. "Come to my office Monday," Victoria said. "Bring your son. Let's talk about the scholarship fund, about your position, about getting you out of survival mode and into a life where you can breathe, create, thrive. Let's make sure Marcus's song becomes more than a memory. Let's make it a promise kept, a legacy honored, a future built on the foundation of a love that time couldn't erase." Maya nodded, unable to speak, and impulsively, Victoria pulled her into an embrace, holding Marcus's daughter the way she wished she could have held Marcus one last time, feeling something hard and cold inside her finally begin to thaw. That night, alone in her penthouse with the city lights spread below her like fallen stars, Victoria finally opened Marcus's letter, and through her tears, she read his words, his forgiveness, his pride in her achievements, his confession that he'd never stopped loving her, his gratitude that she'd escaped the poverty that had claimed him, his hope that she'd found happiness, his certainty that somewhere in the universe, in some other life, they were still together under that summer sky, and finally, his plea that if she ever met Maya, she would see in his daughter the best of both of them, his music and Victoria's strength, and know that their love, though it hadn't lasted, had created ripples that would continue long after he was gone. 3 months later, the Marcus Washington Memorial Scholarship Fund was announced, with Maya as its director and Victoria as its founder, and the gala to celebrate its launch was held in the same hotel where they'd met, with Maya playing Victoria's Promise for an audience who now knew the story behind the song, who understood that love's greatest power isn't always in its duration, but in its transformation, in how it shapes us, challenges us, and if we're brave enough to honor it, continues to create beauty long after its source has disappeared. Victoria never married, but she was no longer alone. She had Maya and Maya's son, a bright 4-year-old who called her Auntie Vicky, and showed early signs of musical talent that made them both smile through tears. And she had a purpose that finally filled the emptiness success alone never could, ensuring that talented, struggling kids like Marcus had been, like Maya had been, like she herself had been, would have the opportunities that circumstances had denied their predecessors. And every year on August 14th, Victoria and Maya would sit together at that same piano in the Grand Meridian lobby, and they would play Victoria's Promise as a duet, Maya carrying the melody her father had written, Victoria adding harmonies she'd learned to create, both of them understanding that the song was no longer about loss but about legacy, no longer about what ended but about what endured, no longer a promise broken but a promise transformed into something neither Marcus nor Victoria could have imagined in their youth, a bridge between past and future, grief and healing, ending and beginning, proving that love, even when it cannot be sustained, can still change the world if we have the courage to honor it, the wisdom to learn from it, and the grace to let it evolve into something new, something beautiful, something that turns even our deepest pain into our greatest purpose.